Around evening at the Ilsung Height Villa inside a quiet apartment, a young man walked into the living room. There, something immediately caught his attention, a travel suitcase sitting in plain view. The sight of it took him by surprise and he paused, unsure of its meaning. While he didn't ask about it right away, he made a mental note to bring it up with his stepmother the next day. As he stood there, a thought lingered in his mind. He reflected on how people who fall into addiction often begin to lose control over their actions, and with time, they can even lose their sense of identity altogether. With that uneasy thought, he went to check on his stepmother, whom he respectfully called Ajumma. The next morning, he greeted her politely and asked if she had slept well. She acknowledged his greeting and mentioned that she had already prepared breakfast. Curious, he brought up that he had thought she was going to make curry. She responded that he had curry the day before and what she made today was also quite good. She then served him the meal with a small smile of confidence. As he began to eat, he noticed her eyes fixed on him. Her gaze made him feel slightly on edge, and though he tried to stay composed, it was difficult under her silent scrutiny. She explained that she was just watching to see if he liked the taste, but her intense stare made him nervous. He jokingly remarked that eating under that kind of pressure might give him indigestion even if he was full. After the death of his father, his stepmother, CornhwaSama, had been left behind. Once things settled after the funeral and all the necessary arrangements were taken care of, the two of them began living together in the apartment. He still remembered the first time he met her. The impression she left on him that day remained vivid in his memory. She had seemed cold, strict, and even slightly intimidating. Her presence felt distant and reserved, with an air of seriousness that made her seem almost dangerous. But he also remembered something else, that she had told him she had always wished to have a son. He was pulled out of his thoughts when she called his name, reminding him not to pick out the beans from the bowl and to eat everything. She even tried to feed him the beans herself, and although he protested that he wasn't a child anymore, she insisted. In the end, he had no choice but to eat them. Then, as the thought of the suitcase returned to his mind, he mentioned it to her, asking what it was for. She began to explain that now that he was grown up, but before she could finish, the sound of a message notification interrupted her. She quickly checked her phone, then stood up in a rush. Glancing at the time, she remarked that the morning had passed by faster than she realized. She said she was already running late for work and that they could talk more when she returned home later. Before leaving, she reminded him to come back safely from college and not to be late. Later that day, Jaewon was at college, walking alongside his friend. The weather was warm, and his friend casually mentioned feeling unusually hot, wondering if it was just him. Jaewon simply responded that it probably was, implying it wasn't that hot. Taking that as a challenge, his friend playfully accused Jaewon of suggesting he was too skinny, comparing himself to an anchovy. Determined to prove his point, he added that he was more muscular than Jaewon and even flexed his thin arms with exaggerated confidence, making a show of his biceps despite their clear lack of bulk. Meanwhile, not far from where they were standing, an upperclassman was trying to talk a female junior, Suyeon, into eating lunch with him. Since there were no more classes that day, he used it as an excuse to invite her out. However, Suyeon politely but firmly turned him down. Jaewon noticed the interaction from a distance. His friend, catching on as well, leaned in and explained that the upperclassman had been persistently bothering Suyeon for a while now. Even though she clearly disliked the attention, he kept pushing, refusing to back off. As the situation unfolded, Suyeon suddenly spotted Jaewon. Her face lit up and she called out to him with enthusiasm, asking if he was heading to college. However, Jaewon remained distant and unresponsive, his reaction quiet and detached. His friend nudged him in the side, whispering that Suyeon was clearly reaching out to him, not only to chat, but also possibly seeking help to escape the persistent upperclassman. He added that she might even be trying to ask Jaewon out. Despite this, Jaewon bluntly replied that he had made a promise to his mother and needed to leave early. His friend grew irritated and told him to just make up an excuse to come home late, but Jaewon insisted that his mother said she had something important to tell him. Without further explanation, he took his leave. Watching him go, his friend couldn't help but mutter in disbelief, calling Jaewon a mama's boy for walking away from both Suyeon's request and a clear opportunity. As Jaewon made his way home, his thoughts drifted to a memory. He remembered when his stepmother, Haesoo, once told him that she would stay by his side until he started college. The words lingered in his mind, especially now. Sitting alone on the bus, he looked troubled, the worry on his face subtle but present. When he finally arrived home, he noticed something strange. The apartment was dark. None of the lights were on, which was unusual. He stepped in cautiously and turned on the lights. The moment the room lit up, he saw clothing scattered messily on the floor, giving the impression that someone had left in a hurry. His eyes quickly searched for the suitcase he had seen before, but it was nowhere to be found. Alarmed, he rushed into Haisu's room. She was startled by his sudden entrance and asked what was wrong. Jaewon, visibly agitated, explained that he had thought she had left him. The combination of the missing suitcase and the dark apartment had triggered the fear that she might have disappeared without saying anything. Haisu calmly reassured him that she hadn't gone anywhere. She explained that she had simply moved the suitcase and had no intention of leaving. With a steady voice, she promised that she would not abandon him. Despite her words, Jaewon still seemed uncertain. Needing comfort, he asked if he could stay with her for the night. Later that night, Jaewon was seen lying in bed in his room. The silence was heavy and he stared at the ceiling and thought. Not long after, Haisu quietly entered his room. That night, Haisu quietly chose to spend the night together with Jaewon, staying by his side. The atmosphere was quiet, though no words were spoken about the arrangement. The next scene shifted to a rainy day at a high school. Outside, the rain poured steadily and Jaewon stood near the school building without an umbrella. A female classmate stood nearby, proudly showing off her umbrella, mentioning that her mother had thoughtfully prepared it for her. When Jaewon asked if they could share it at least until the nearest convenience store, the girl hesitated and then refused. She explained that the umbrella was too small to cover both of them, insisting it was a mini umbrella, and walked off by herself. Left standing in the rain, Jaewon couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious. He wondered if she had refused to share the umbrella because of something unpleasant. Maybe he smelled bad? But he quickly reminded himself that he showered every day. Before he could dwell on it too long, the girl turned around briefly and snapped that her refusal had nothing to do with that, then left him behind in the rain. As he stood there debating whether to wait out the rain, Jaewon was unexpectedly surprised to see Haisu arriving. She was drenched from head to toe, clearly having rushed over without any concern for getting wet. She held up an umbrella, saying that she had realized he forgot his and came to bring it to him. She admitted that she was in such a hurry that she only brought one umbrella. Without hesitation, the two of them began walking together under the single umbrella. As they walked, she casually asked him what he would like to eat for dinner that night, making the moment feel normal despite how soaked she was. The following day, Haisu was at her workplace. She sat at her desk, her face pale and the dark circles under her eyes impossible to miss. She silently acknowledged to herself that she hadn't gotten a single minute of sleep the night before. She recalled that she had intended to leave Jaewon's room once he fell asleep, but he had seemed tense and self-aware the entire night, preventing her from slipping away. Now she felt a growing sense of urgency. She had to find a solution, and fast. Turning to her computer, she searched online for forums and resources related to her situation. She found a thread that introduced an agency offering help in circumstances like hers and considered contacting them. Just as she was deep in thought, her subordinate, Jihu, startled her with his sudden appearance, asking if she was okay. He pointed out that she looked very pale. In response, she asked him if she really looked that bad and then quickly shut off her computer. She told Jihu she would be heading out early to meet someone and that he could leave whenever he finished his own work. Jihu agreed but quietly assumed she was just stressed out about the current project. He noted to himself that Haisu had a habit of over-worrying about work, which he considered both her flaw and her strength, something he secretly admired about her. Later, Haisu was seen sitting in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, waiting as she stirred her drink absent-mindedly. Her friend soon arrived, taking a seat across from her and immediately noticing something was off. With a knowing look, she remarked that Haisu appeared deeply troubled, specifically about a man. Haisu was taken aback and asked how her friend had figured that out. Her friend simply pointed out that it was written all over her face, clear as day. She then asked if Haisu had canceled her upcoming trip because of this mysterious man. After a brief pause, Haisu admitted that she had. Her friend, clearly surprised, commented that she always believed Haisu would be fine without having a man in her life and asked who this man was that had affected her so much. When Haisu calmly answered that it was her stepson, her friend was so shocked that she accidentally spat her drink straight into Haisu's face. Without losing her composure, Haisu gave her a cold look and said she'd let it go this time, but warned her not to do it again. Her friend quickly apologized and handed her a napkin to wipe her face, trying to compose herself before asking Haisu to explain what exactly was going on with Jaewon. Haisu looked uncertain, admitting that she didn't even know where to begin. Eventually, she gathered her thoughts and shared everything that had happened, step by step. Her friend listened carefully, growing visibly more alarmed with each detail. When Haisu finished, her friend asked why she hadn't pushed Jaewon away more firmly. Haisu responded that because she wasn't his biological mother, she felt it was only right to be kinder to him, perhaps more lenient than she should have been. Without another word, her friend suddenly stood up, clearly determined. She told Haisu to go home and promised she would figure something out, but insisted that Haisu must not interfere. Haisu, unsure, asked if her friend was certain she could handle it. Her friend gave a confident nod, saying she could so long as Haisu agreed to leave everything to her. With that, the two left the coffee shop together. Back at home, Jaiwon was sitting quietly when he noticed a notification on his phone. It was a message from Haisu, one that had arrived 20 minutes earlier, mentioning that her friend would be coming over. Just as he finished reading the message, he heard the sound of the door opening. Haisu and her friend stepped inside, and her friend called out cheerfully, saying that she had brought ice cream for him. Although the air was casual, there was a moment of quiet disbelief in Haisu's friend, Kyunga, when she caught sight of Jaiwon again, taller now, his features more defined, carrying the kind of composure that only time could grant. Her thoughts involuntarily drifted back to a simpler time when he was still a child tugging at her sleeve with schoolbooks in hand, hoping she'd assist him with his homework. Despite his request back then, she would always feign ignorance, insisting that she had never been the studious type and wasn't equipped to help him. Instead of offering guidance, she would often change the subject abruptly, one time diverting the conversation toward recounting her recent trip to Jeju Island, trying to charm her way out of the moment, to which he would usually brush off with a quiet determination to handle it himself. Now, standing in the present, the contrast left her momentarily stunned by how grown up he had become. His presence was no longer that of the boy who once hovered over homework assignments, but of a young man who now carried himself with ease and confidence. As Jaiwon approached, he greeted her with familiar warmth, and though it was meant to be comforting, it left her momentarily frozen. His casual comment, suggesting that nothing had changed and she looked exactly the same, was meant as a light-hearted reflection, but she sensed something deeper in his voice. Realizing her unease, he quickly attempted to dispel the tension, his tone softening as he admitted that he was simply happy to see her again. Watching the interaction unfold, Haisu couldn't help but feel a stir of unease herself. Kyunga, who had previously hinted that she might be blunt or critical when the topic of Jaiwon came up, was now behaving with an unusual gentleness. Her sudden friendliness felt out of place, bordering on performative. Unable to keep her thoughts to herself, Haisu curtly reminded Kyunga that the ice cream they had bought was beginning to melt, an indirect nudge meant to disrupt the atmosphere. Seizing the opportunity, Kyunga invited Jaiwon to join her in eating the ice cream, her voice laced with casual charm, while Haisu looked on with growing uncertainty. Despite the innocent setting, a sense of doubt lingered in her mind, gnawing quietly. Was Kyunga someone she could really trust around Jaiwon? That concern only deepened later when Kyunga found herself alone in Jaiwon's room. Casually observing the photos on his desk and shelves, snapshots of memories, frozen moments that gave away the subtle growth of his life. Her voice carried a playful curiosity as she asked whether he was currently seeing anyone. His response came without hesitation. He wasn't, and he added that he simply preferred the comfort of living with Haisu. Kyunga, never one to let a remark slide without commentary, teased that if he kept on like this, he would eventually turn into a mama's boy. Jaiwon, unbothered, simply shrugged off the remark, stating that it didn't really concern him. After all, he wasn't particularly interested in anyone else anyway. As the quiet conversation between Kyunga and Jaiwon unfolded in the room, something shifted within Kyunga. The pieces were falling into place, and she finally understood the root of Haisu's concern, the subtle, ever-deepening attachment Jaiwon held toward her. With a calm yet thoughtful tone, Kyunga began to explain to Jaiwon that it was natural, especially when young, to feel drawn to someone older. She emphasized that such feelings, though powerful, could often lead to confusion, making it hard to separate genuine connection from something idealized. But Jaiwon's response came with the firm clarity of someone who had already sorted through his emotions. He didn't seem confused. He didn't hesitate. He stated simply and directly that he felt happiest whenever he was with Haisu. That was all there was to it. It wasn't about projection or misunderstanding, it was the feeling itself that he held onto, and he had no desire to be apart from her. Kyunga was taken aback. The conviction in his voice was far from naive, it was grounded, sincere, and unshaken. At that moment, she realized that this was far more serious than she had anticipated. With this newfound urgency, she stood up and walked to the door. As she opened it, she found Haisu standing just outside, hesitating at the threshold as if unsure whether to come in. Without revealing much of the conversation, Kyunga asked Haisu to step out just for an hour and come back later. Haisu, puzzled and a little suspicious, questioned the need for such secrecy, insisting that whatever was being discussed could be done with her present. However, Kyunga was firm. She stated that Haisu's presence was distracting for the moment, giving no room for argument as she gently but purposefully closed the door behind her and turned the lock. As the lock clicked into place, Kyunga's expression shifted into one of quiet resolve. She wasn't doing this out of malice, but out of fear that if left unspoken, something precious might be lost again. She thought of the past, of the people Haisu had already lost. To Kyunga, this was her chance to step in before things spiraled beyond repair. Within the room, she turned back to Jiwon, no longer in the role of a playful friend but of someone trying to intervene. Her goal now was to challenge his certainty, not to mock or belittle it, but to put it to the test. She needed him to see that if his happiness was so deeply tied to Haisu alone, then perhaps he hadn't yet opened himself to the wider world, to other connections or possibilities. In her heart, she hoped she could still redirect what felt like a dangerous path, that she could prove to him that his happiness didn't have to begin and end with just one person, even someone as important as Haisu. While Kyunga remained behind closed doors, trying to reach through the layers of emotion and certainty that surrounded Jiwon's attachment to Haisu, the woman in question sat alone on a gently creaking swinging chair just outside, tucked within the quiet corners of the neighborhood. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen of her phone, the message she had sent moments ago still visible, her contact details forwarded to the agency she had come across earlier on a forum, a decision made on impulse. Driven by something she couldn't fully explain. She told herself it was simply curiosity, that there was no harm in exploring new opportunities. But as she tapped her fingers anxiously against her knee, she realized it wasn't curiosity that had driven her, it was restlessness. A strange and growing impatience was clawing at her chest, though she had no clear reason why. It wasn't like Kyunga to overstep. It wasn't like Jiwon to hide things from her. And yet, something about the locked door and the private conversation unsettled her in a way she couldn't dismiss. After a few more moments of resisting the urge, Haisu stood up from the swinging chair. She told herself that an hour must have passed already, and whatever they needed to talk about would surely be over by now. With that reasoning, she walked back toward the house, determination quiet but firm in her steps. Inside the room, Kyunga and Jiwon were finishing up a workout, one meant to test his limits, challenge his focus, and push his body and mind away from his emotional dependence. It had been more than just exercise, it was Kyunga's method of breaking through, showing him that there were other forms of happiness, other ways to feel alive. She told him not to mention what they had just done, to keep it between the two of them for now. But before Jiwon could respond, the door creaked open. Haisu stepped inside, her presence immediate and disarming. Her eyes scanned the room, Jiwon slightly flushed, Kyunga with her arms crossed and posture stiff. Something in the air felt different, charged. With a neutral tone edged in subtle suspicion, Haisu asked what they were doing. Both Kyunga and Jiwon were caught off guard by Haisu's sudden return, the door swinging open before either had the chance to compose themselves. The tension that hung in the room was swiftly replaced by a startled silence as Haisu's eyes darted between them, curious and mildly suspicious. Kyunga, ever quick to regain her footing, forced a nervous smile as she searched for a believable explanation. Her gaze landed on the small puddle of melted ice cream on the table nearby, an oversight that unexpectedly came to her rescue. Feigning casualness, Kyunga pointed it out and explained that Jiwon had accidentally spilled the ice cream earlier and had to clean himself off, hence the delay and the state they were in. Picking up on her cue, Jiwon nodded and confirmed her story without adding much detail, his tone carefully neutral. Satisfied that the story held up, Kyunga quickly shifted the conversation, asking if Haisu was all right. She gently acknowledged that Haisu must have come back out of concern and reassured her that there was no longer anything to worry about. With a lightness she had clearly rehearsed in her mind, Kyunga added that Jiwon had probably been too focused on his studies to properly understand certain emotional matters, but she had taken the time to talk things through with him. Now that he had a better grasp of things, she was confident the situation would improve going forward. She concluded with a subtle suggestion, encouraging Haisu to continue acting normally around Jiwon, not to treat him any differently than she always had. With that, Kyunga gathered her things and took her leave, offering Haisu a warm smile on her way out. Left standing in the quiet room, Haisu was filled with a mixture of gratitude and relief. While part of her still harbored unease about the nature of Kyunga's intervention, she couldn't deny the sense of reassurance she now felt. Whatever had happened behind that locked door, it seemed Kyunga had handled it with her usual tact and strength. Elsewhere, in a university lecture hall bustling with students settling into their seats, casual chatter filled the air. Among them was Suryan, seated beside a friend who was venting about a recent confrontation with an upperclassman. The frustration in her voice was unmistakable as she lamented the fallout and the awkward silence that had followed the fight, leaving the two of them barely on speaking terms. A few rows ahead, Jiwon sat with his friend Sungbeek in the front row, his attention buried in a book. Sunbeek, spotting Suyun just behind them, nudged Jaiwan lightly and whispered if he should go greet her. Without lifting his gaze, Jaiwan replied softly that Suyun was in the middle of a conversation and wouldn't appreciate being interrupted. Meanwhile, Suyun's friend continued her one-sided monologue, rambling now about her laundry habits with her older brother. She complained that he never washed his clothes properly and constantly wore inappropriate outfits around the house. The mundane familiarity of her words struck something in Jaiwan, the imagery cutting too close to his own private thoughts. Seemingly without warning, he rose from his seat mid-lecture, muttering to Sunbeek that he had just remembered something urgent and had to leave. Sunbeek looked up in surprise, protesting that Jaiwan was bailing on him after hyping up their post-class plans to hit the game room. But Jaiwan was already on his way out, not bothering to look back. As the door closed behind him, Suyun turned to Sunbeek, puzzled, and asked if Jaiwan had just left without attending the lecture. Sunbeek shrugged, still mildly annoyed, and responded that Jaiwan had said he had some urgent business to take care of. At home, Jaiwan moved about with an easy rhythm, assuming he had the place to himself. As he approached the laundry area, a mundane but necessary task in his mind, he wondered aloud if Haisu had gone out. Seeing that the laundry was still unattended, a faint sense of relief crossed his face. He was glad to have gotten there first. Glancing over the pile, he muttered to himself about how surprised he still was that women seemed to dislike laundry to such an extent, a thought clearly influenced by past experiences and perhaps the conversation from the lecture earlier. However, his sense of calm was abruptly shattered by the sudden sound of someone behind him. Turning quickly, his eyes widened as he saw Haisu standing just a few steps away. She had been there all along. Haisu, unfazed by his surprise, smiled gently and explained that she had come home early because she wanted to have dinner with him. She mentioned she was planning to make curry his favorite and asked if that would be okay. Caught off guard but visibly pleased, Jaiwan responded that it was fine, adding that he would come over after he finished the laundry. Later that evening, Haisu sat quietly in her room, her thoughts unsettled. The moment in the laundry room replayed in her mind, not because of what was said, but because of what she sensed beneath the surface. Something in Jaiwan's reaction, in his behavior, continued to gnaw at her. As she sat there, her phone buzzed beside her. Reaching for it, she saw that it was a message from the agency she had contacted earlier through an anonymous forum. The message was concise but direct. They had seen her post and believed they understood what she was dealing with. They expressed a willingness to help and provided further details for a meeting. Haisu stared at the screen, her fingers trembling slightly as she considered the implications. She wondered whether this agency could truly help unravel the complicated feelings and blurred boundaries surrounding Jaiwan. Was it naive to hope for a solution through strangers? By the next morning, she found herself behind the wheel of her car, heading toward the address she had been given. Her grip on the steering wheel was firm, her expression unreadable. Doubt lingered. Was this a reckless move or a necessary step forward? Despite not knowing exactly what to expect, she had no better alternatives, and for now that was enough. Eventually, the tall facade of Grand Haight came into view. The building stood polished and imposing, its reputation preceding it. As Haisu approached the entrance of the room, a quiet uncertainty settled over her. She hesitated just before reaching the door, her mind weighed down by unease. She had no idea what kind of person awaited her on the other side, and for a moment, the thought of turning back felt like a reasonable option. Her hand lingered near the doorknob, but before she could act on her hesitation, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, her expression marked by mild surprise upon seeing Haisu. Without waiting for formalities, she remarked on Haisu's unexpected arrival, wondering aloud why she hadn't been informed beforehand. Haisu, still processing the shift in atmosphere, quietly stated that she had just arrived. With a casual wave, the woman invited her in. Even as she stepped inside, Haisu's apprehension did not subside. She glanced around and hesitated by the threshold, voicing her concern about whether it was really all right for them to speak there. The woman, however, responded with a dry reassurance, saying she had no intention of harming her and again gestured for her to come in. Reluctantly, Haisu followed and took a seat on the sofa. As they settled into the quiet room's quiet, the woman poured them drinks, mentioning that she had thought it would be difficult to have a proper conversation outside, so she had arranged this private setting instead. Without delay, Haisu brought up the reason for her visit. She reminded the woman of her claim that there was supposedly a solution to the problem weighing on her. The woman responded calmly, explaining that many people had come to her with similar concerns and that, despite how overwhelming the issue might have seemed at first, it had actually been surprisingly easy to resolve. She hinted that the answer was just within reach and gestured toward a nearby room, suggesting Haisu take a look. Something about the suggestion made Haisu pause. A faint sense of unease crept into her chest, and though she couldn't shake the bad feeling, she reminded herself of her purpose. This was for Jaiwon. Drawing in a breath, she opened the door. What met her eyes, however, was entirely unexpected. A workout session was in progress inside the room. Disbelief flickered across her face. Without uttering a word, she backed away and promptly left, her steps swift and resolute. This was not what she had come for, and certainly not what she had envisioned for Jaiwon. By the time evening fell, a heavy rain blanketed the city. Back at the apartment, Jaiwon was quietly tending to the laundry indoors, carefully spreading out the damp clothes. The sound of a sudden thud interrupted the rhythm of his work, drawing his attention toward the hallway. There, sprawled on the floor, was Hae-soo. Alarmed, he rushed over and quickly helped her up. It didn't take long to realize she had been drinking. Her movements were sluggish, her words slightly slurred. Supporting her carefully, he led her into her room. Once there, Hae-soo murmured something that caught him off guard. She expressed that perhaps they should no longer live together. Her voice, though soft, carried a firm conviction. She mentioned having looked at a few places earlier that day and declared her intention to move out and live on her own. Jaiwon, still trying to understand the sudden turn of events, asked why she would say such a thing. Her response was quiet, filled with guilt. She confessed that their living arrangement may have held him back, that because they were always together, he no longer seemed interested in connecting with anyone else. She feared she had unintentionally ruined his chance at something more. Later that same night, Jaiwon found himself outside Kyungga's apartment. The rain hadn't let up, soaking him as he stood at her door. When she opened it and saw him, her eyes widened in surprise, concerned by his unexpected visit. She asked what had brought him there in such weather and if something had happened. Without pressing him for details, she urged him to wash up first, saying they could talk afterwards. But Jaiwon, still damp from the rain and with emotions running high, looked at her and instead suggested that they work out. Kyungga stood frozen for a moment, startled by the unusual request. Her instinct was to remind him that she was Hae-soo's friend, that there were boundaries she shouldn't cross. But before she could articulate any of this, Jaiwon spoke again, his voice steady but faintly tinged with desperation. He told her he was fully aware of her connection to Hae-soo, that it was precisely why he had come. In his mind, she was the only person he could think of at that moment, someone who might understand the situation even partially and offer the kind of support he couldn't find elsewhere. Still met with silence, Jaiwon took a step back, realizing he may have overstepped. He apologized quietly for showing up so late, his posture already turning toward the door. But before he could leave, Kyungga stopped him. She asked where he thought he was going at such a late hour, especially with the rain pouring down outside. Her tone softened as she told him to wash up first, assuring him that she would wait. Later, alone in her room, Kyungga sat on the edge of her bed, her thoughts restless. She replayed his words over and over in her mind. Something had clearly happened, something that had shaken him enough to come to her. She couldn't help but reflect on her own actions, how she had spoken to Hae-soo recently, whether her frustration had been misplaced, or whether it had been her gesture of support for Jaiwon the other day that had tangled her further into this complicated web. She wasn't sure how she had ended up here, caught between them, but now that she was, the weight of it began to press down on her. When Jaiwon returned, freshly showered and changed, she looked at him and quietly said that she understood. His expression, the tremble just beneath his calm surface, told her everything. He didn't look well, he looked tired, unmoored, shaken in a way she hadn't seen before. She admitted that after what happened the last time, she felt partially responsible too. Without saying more, she stood up, prepared herself, and together they began the workout session. After they finish a workout session, Kyungga was glad that it's over and was about to go wash up, but Jaiwon claims that he wants them to do another session of workout, which she was surprised by. She tries to explain that it's hard to do 2 workout sessions in a row, but Jaiwon claims that it's okay as he even felt more energetic than before, to which they proceed to another session of workout. As the workout session wound down and the tension in the room gradually eased, with a hint of hesitation but a growing sense of familiarity, she remarked that he actually looked better without his glasses, asking if he had ever considered not wearing them. The comment, casual on the surface, carried with it a quiet curiosity, perhaps even an unexpected tenderness that neither of them acknowledged directly. By the following morning, Hae-soo lay motionless on her bed, the weight of last night's memories surfacing in fragmented flashes. Her words, heavy with finality and emotion, played back in her head. For a moment, she opened her eyes abruptly, uncertain whether it had all been real or just a strange dream born of exhaustion and drink. But as the clarity of morning settled in, the truth followed with it. Meanwhile, Jaiwon was already on his way home, the cool morning air brushing against his skin. He felt lighter, as though the burden he had been carrying had briefly loosened its grip. When he entered the apartment, he was surprised to see Haisu already up. She looked at him, her tone casual as she asked if he was just getting back from school. He hesitated, then mentioned that he had thought it was a public holiday, only to realize too late that he had forgotten.